When I watched our Pride service on the internet, and of course the accompanying protest that took place across the street, people who fundamentally disagreed with our understanding of inclusiveness and are affirming of people from the LGBT plus community. I thought to myself, it's everybody's right to think and to say what they wish to say and to protest. But as Norman rightly pointed out, you can express your views. We live in one of the most freest countries in the world, but you've no right, really, you have a legal right, but you have no right, moral right, to stand outside church, chapel, mosque, synagogue, or temple to tell people that they are incorrect in their understanding of faith. And that's basically what was done to us. And basically, as Norman rightly pointed out, that was intended, probably with more aggression, to do at the Islamic Centre. And I remember a number of years ago, a church not far from here was having a meeting in the church, and they had a person speaking about conversion therapy, which I absolutely and totally disagree with, and I would call it a pseudo-science. Yet, they have a right to do that in their church. And yet, some people went up, friends of mine, and picketed that church. And I absolutely disagreed with them doing that. People's faith and their space of worship is sacred to them, and we must not intimidate, threaten, or protest outside their space. And that applies, as I said, to church, chapel, synagogue, and including Islamic Centre, and while I'm on it, orange halls. When you go to Carlisle Circus, the Orange Hall in Carlisle Circus is like a fortress because it has been attacked on numerous times. So when we learn that it's not just about us, it's about applying what we think we're entitled to everybody else. I thought I'd just say that before I actually speak on what I really want to speak on, because I was really so impressed with our Pride service and the numbers that turned up and the volume with which people sang in order to counter the protesters outside. It was so heartening, it was so beautiful, so sacred, and so holy in its own way. But I've just returned about a week ago from a country called Estonia. And up to a week ago, or 2 weeks ago, I knew nothing about Estonia. Now I know everything about Estonia, and I'm an authority on Estonia. So if you need to know anything about Estonia, you come to me. Maybe you're like me, that there's a tangible excitement arriving in a new country, your first visit. A bit disappointed though, that we weren't stopped at the border because we were on a bus between Latvia and Estonia. And nobody took our passports to stamp them. I always loved that, having to stop at the border, our passport stamped, and the whole excitement of a new country revealed to you. But sadly, the EU has put an end to that. That's if you're traveling on an EU passport. I was going to say that Estonia is a strange country, but living in Ireland, that would be a peculiar thing to say about another country. But I think different would be better. Tallinn, the capital of Estonia, has one of the most beautiful old towns you will ever see. Never mind Prague, never mind Budapest. The old town of Tallinn is stunning and well worth a visit and not crowded. In the upper old town, there is the most beautiful Orthodox cathedral, the Alexander Nevsky Cathedral, and it was built during the Russian Empire between 1894 and 1900. So really, it's a relatively new cathedral. John 14, verse 2 says, as I touched on earlier on, in my Father's house there are many mansions. And if it was not true, I would have told you so. And we know in this neighbourhood of South Belfast, there are many mansions associated with various religious churches and different faiths. To some extent the same with Tallinn. The cathedral is Eastern Orthodox. And you can see that once you see the most incredible, beautiful dome over the cathedral. I entered it. I lit a candle for all of you, even the ones that don't want candles lit, still got a candle lit for them. And I bought a little icon, typical Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, little two-picture thing you fold out, and there's Mary and Jesus. And when I came out, our guide informed us that the cathedral is known as Putin's church. As they are Eastern Orthodox, they are loyal to the Russian Orthodox. So I'm afraid to say with my little purchase and the lighting of the candle, I may have accidentally financed Putin's war. Hopefully not. On the theme of mansions, there are other Orthodox churches who are more in line with the Finnish Orthodox and are part of the Constantinople Patriarch. So they'd be closer to the Greek Orthodox and would not see eye to eye with their fellow Russian Orthodox Christians. Nothing new there. 60% of the population describe themselves as Estonian, and 27% describe themselves as Russian. Now, I'm not sure of the rest, but the rest could be of Finnish, German, and other origin, and Catholic. Most people are of the Lutheran faith. And you can be an Estonian citizen and have, of course, an Estonian passport. Or you can identify as a Russian citizen and have a Russian passport. But you can't be both, unlike here. You have to choose. You're either Estonian or Russian and identify with that citizenship, but not both. The Estonians will explain to you that they were threatened, that the possibility that the Russians at some stage may be the bigger population, and they feared this when they were part of the Soviet Union. Slowly but surely, Estonians were becoming a minority in their own country, and they feared that. They are close to Finland. They share lots of cultural affinity and language and faith with the Finns, even though they are separated by water. So they are separated by water from Finland, but yet feel more at home with Finland and allegiance with Finland than their closest land neighbour, Latvia, Lithuania, and Russia. Kind of reminds you of somewhere else that water is not the divisive line between these people. Water is the bond between the Finns and the Estonians. While I was there, you always bring a book when you travel, so you get bored looking out the window of the bus. You can have a read. And the one I bought was this one. I saw it coming out last year and I was intrigued by it. Who by Fire? Leonard Cohen in the Sinai by Matty Friedman. So I'm still sticking to my mansions theme when I talk about Leonard Cohen. Leonard Cohen, whom most of you will be familiar with, indeed myself and Isabella went to see one of his final concerts in Belfast, and it was amazing when he was in his 80s. Leonard Cohen believed somewhat passionately with the concept of nation, passionately with the concept of a people and belonging to a people. And particularly when Israel was attacked during the Yom Kippur War. He lived in the island of Triet, or Hydra, with his girlfriend and child at that time. And when the war broke out, he was depressed and distressed, and he took himself to Israel, offering to work in a kibbutz, anything to help. He was not a soldier. He didn't believe in taking life, but he still felt he wanted to do something for Israel. And interesting, Sheena, when you mentioned Imagine, Leonard Cohen did not agree with the sentiments of Imagine, and he publicly expressed his views on that. He didn't agree that there was no heaven. He most certainly didn't agree, Imagine no country and no religion. For Leonard Cohen, in a very obscure way, his religion was important to him as a Jew. So he felt that John Lennon's song, in his opinion, was somewhat superficial, even though I have to admit I'm a huge fan and always was. He was always, John Lennon, my favourite Beatle. But when Leonard Cohen got to Israel, there was no hope of him working on a kibbutz. Everybody knew who he was. They all had his records. Everybody identified him. So he ended up traveling around, entertaining, not at big concerts, but in the Sinai, singing to small groups of people, mostly young people in combats, fighting another terrible war which seems to go on forever. And one of the most loved tunes he sang was Who by Fire. How many will pass and how many be created? Who will live and who will die? Who will reach the end of their days and who will not? Who by water and who by fire? and who by wild beasts, who by famine, and who by thirst. It is an actual fact a Jewish prayer, chanted originally on Rosh Hashanah, which is the beginning of the Jewish New Year. And what it's suggesting is, by the time you meet Yom Kippur, it is sealed. How many will have passed away? How many new lives will be created? Who will live and who will die? Who will come to his timely end and who to a non-timely end? Who will perish by fire and who by water? Who by the sword and who by the beast? Who by hunger and who by thirst? I don't know if this is a bit of a generalization, but I can always notice a different vibration in Jewish prayers to Christian prayers. Our prayers are usually calling on God to do something. Matter of fact, I think we ask him to do too much. Sometimes the prayers go on for nearly a day. And if I were God, I'd actually hang up. Because some of the requests are outrageous. That he should just about do everything for him. Whereas in the Jewish tradition, in the Jewish prayer, there seems to be an acceptance of what has happened. An acceptance of what might happen, as in who by fire, a Jewish prayer. But in Yom Kippur, you make atonement for all that has happened. Maybe we as Christians need to make atonement. Because the people who were on our streets yesterday, and as Norman rightly pointed out, screaming out vile language about Muslims, about racism, about anyone really. They are a product of us. They didn't arrive from Mars. A spaceship didn't land, because I noticed a lot of them, by the way, had Dublin accents. I apologise for that, but that's the problem with the Enterprise. It's very cheap to come up on a Saturday. And a crowd of them came up, and were from Dublin, carrying the tricolours. They're a product of our society. They are part of us. And we are right to condemn every word they say. And we are right to condemn everything they do. But at some stage, we have to cross the street and talk to them. You might even find you're talking to a cousin, a neighbour. I don't know, but they're not alien. They're most certainly not from another planet. And I think that's what Christianity should be about, is recognizing that. We say we're for the sinners, but we clearly identify those who are sinners, and it's most certainly not us. It's always the other chap. So I think we need to reflect on that. I've moved a little bit away from the Baltic states. The 3 Baltic states live in close friendship with a very fearful eye on Russia. That we are so aware of that. In Lithuania, myself and Isabella went to hear the British ambassador speaking in the cathedral square, promising multiple weaponry and aid to the Ukrainian people to fight the Russians. And as you can well imagine, the Lithuanians were cheering. And of course, I applaud the ambassador as well, because we all support allegedly the Ukraine. You see every now and again soldiers with American flashes on their uniforms, Polish flashes, and British flashes on their uniforms. There's 9,000 soldiers from NATO stationed in the Baltic state, helping them allegedly to keep the Russians at bay. So it's a real tangible fear. They're small countries, and they only came into existence in 1991. 1991. Well, of course they were there before, but nobody cared about them. Nobody cared about the Baltic states. I remember one time I was on an anti-apartheid march in Dublin, and I eventually ended up on the executive of the anti-apartheid movement. And there were thousands of people, and we were marching to Lansdowne Road to protest against the Irish rugby team playing South Africa. And there were about 50,000 people on the march, led by people like Conor Cruise O'Brien, Mary Robinson, Bernadette Devlin, as she was at the time. I was just one of the people on the march, carrying my Union banner. And as we marched along through to Ball's Bridge, there were a small group of people with a banner and one of these flags. It's an Estonian flag. I know flag waving in Belfast can get you in trouble, but I'm sure an Estonian flag will be okay. But they had an Estonian flag. And as we passed them, they were silent and just had their banner, Free Estonia, and waving their Estonian flag. Do you know what the crowd did? They booed and hissed them and said, "Long live the Soviet Union." Because most of the people on the Irish left supported the Soviet Union. Estonia didn't matter. Lithuania didn't matter. Not our problem. And you know, back to what Sheena was talking about in Imagine. It was in actual fact their faith, their religion that John Lennon imagined we would be better without. It was their religion that got them through all of that. Their diversity of religion. Lithuanians Catholic, Latvians Catholic and Protestant, Estonians Orthodox, Evangelical Lutheran, and some Catholic, and some Eastern Orthodox. Their faith and their religion, they would thank you. I'm going to do a sermon someday on the taxi driver that took us to the airport. An unbelievable. I never got in a taxi before in my life where the taxi driver quoted Beckett, Nietzsche. Now that was only two of many. I mean, a whole sermon about this taxi driver in town, and that how he said his faith got him through living in the Soviet Union, when none of us in the West cared whether they lived or died. But now they're back. And you can treat this as a bit of an ad for the Baltic states. If you're thinking of going somewhere with little or no tourists, not cheap, good food, the most incredible, beautiful countryside, Estonia, 70% of it is forestation. And the most beautiful cities. Riga is like a miniature Paris. You won't go wrong if you take yourself to the Baltic states. I'm going to prepare a place for you. That's what we were promised. And in South Belfast, we like to think that's what we have, the Islamic Centre. We have All Souls, an inclusive church. Over in our hall, Forward Faith International, a Black African church. Over the other side, the Seventh-day Adventists, the Catholic Church. This is a classic example, South Belfast, of what the Lord meant when he said, "In my house there are many mansions." And nobody has any right to come into this neighbourhood and try to break, destroy, or damage that beautiful relationship that exists here between people of all faiths and no faith. So let us dwell on those simple words. In my Father's house there are many mansions. And if it wasn't true, I wouldn't have told